Good evening, gentlemen. A very warm welcome to all the participants who are here on time. And like they always say, the loyalty should go to people who are on time. So let's talk payments. It's such a pleasure, to be welcoming you, to this session. And my name is Ramnathan, and in many ways, I'm the host manager as the head of executive education at IFMR GSB Kriya University. Today's session, the first few minutes, I just thought I should spend some time taking you through Kriya, the institution, followed by the executive education business here, before I introduce the faculty, two very distinguished faculty, who have been gracious, to be part of this session. As you're aware, any institution is built by its leadership. We have an extremely distinguished leadership. There are not many institutions, I must tell you, who have crossed the milestone of 50 years. And IFMR Kriya University is one such institution which has crossed the 50-year landmark. Largely supported, by the erstwhile ICICI, who gave the seed capital, with the twin objectives of evangelizing financial knowledge, apart from research that impacts, the how should I put it, the underserved segments, of the society. And Mr. Vagul, therefore, continues, to be chancellor of the institution, and he has been able to bring in some of the finest industry leaders and distinguished academicians, to be heading the board. Now, as an institution, what builds the institution apart from leaders is the faculty and research, and it has distinguished itself in both the areas. And not many institutions can boast, of having been associated with 3 central bank governors and 4 chief economic advisors, including the current chief economic advisor, who was for some time, the dean of the Graduate School of Business. And apart from that, Esther Dufalo, the Nobel laureate, is part of the board. And to her credit, she acknowledged, the research data that are provided by IFMR contributed immensely to her Nobel Prize, as well as the book, that she has been able to popularize. And there are 3 parts, to this institution. One, of course, is the executive education that we are all part of. You have the Graduate School of Business, which offers the 2-year full-time MBA, apart from an executive MBA. And you also have the School of Interwoven Arts and Science. And therefore, executive education is very uniquely positioned because it marries classical management with some of the areas of liberal arts. And apart from that, you have a very active research ecosystem, which contributes tremendously, to the larger society at large. And some of the finest funding bodies, have been associated with the research. The 3 pillars on which executive education is built on is finance, technology, and sustainability. And we try to stitch these 3 pillars, to whatever solution we offer. And we have been largely present in the customized space, working with some of the finest institutions spread across different business verticals. And I take great pleasure in welcoming 2 of the distinguished faculty. Mahesh Ramachandran, the lead faculty for this program. And I must thank you, Mahesh, for being part of this session. To talk about Mahesh, to quote him, he's an entrepreneur at heart and an investor by choice. Mahesh is part of the Leadership Council of FinGlue, led by the Indian government, which is the FinTech Center for Excellence set up by the Government of India. And as you will notice, he was part of the India's UPI story. Mahesh is the founder of Tech Innovations. Its objective, is to quote him, unleash disruptive innovations by investing and nurturing a series of high-growth emerging tech companies. Above all, he is inspired, by Abdul Kalam, and he has founded a fintech company that operates in over, I repeat, 30,000 villages. I repeat, 30,000 villages. You can imagine the lives, that he is touching, servicing over 6 billion customers across 20 plus states, transacting over 1.9 billion, more than 15,000 crores a year. Mahesh did his post-MBA Sloan Fellowship program from the London Business School in UK, and currently volunteers as the London Business School Alumni Club president based out of Chennai. He's also an alumnus of Stanford Seed Transformation Program and volunteers as the treasurer of the Stanford Transformation Network alumni. An avid mentor and teacher, he teaches entrepreneurship and valuation of startups. He's a visiting faculty at Korea University, apart from well-known institutions like the National Police Academy, National Academy of Direct Taxes, ISB, and so on. Thank you once again, Mahesh, for agreeing to be part of this program.
Sure.
The other distinguished faculty I would like to introduce today is Pradeep, a true blue-blooded generalist who has managed ecosystem and outreach products, people, program, and projects. He has built partnerships pipeline for investments, business, and corporate development. He has worked on market entry, lateral hiring, and university relations. He has worked in diverse industries which range from payments, publishing, telecom equipment, manufacturing, and pharmaceuticals across the globe, which includes India, USA, and Philippines. Pradeep has a strong expertise and experience in strategy and operations, innovation, open innovation, entrepreneurship, incubation, with strong ability to identify synergies and build relationship, manage diverse stakeholders, and get things done. He holds a patent on payment transaction using an augmented reality device. Pradeep co-founded a startup to sell digital books in Indian vernacular languages. He's a passionate teacher, a trainer to corporates and campuses covering more than 10,000 students. And Pradeep is also a best-selling author of 3 non-fiction books in Tamil. Pradeep is an electronics engineer and an MBA from Asian Institute of Management, Manila. He's also a recipient of Chaining Research, Science, Innovation, Leadership Fellowship at Oxford. Welcome, Pradeep, and thank you for agreeing to be part of this program. Over to you. Let's talk payments. Over to you, Mahesh and Pradeep.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramanathan. That was a very generous introduction, and it's such a pleasure to be part of this masterclass on payments. Thank you, Pradeep. It's wonderful to have you here, a veteran in the payment system. And good evening for all the viewers. And if you're joining from this time zone, and welcome to Kriya's masterclass on payment ecosystem. This session is mainly intended to understand India's overall payment ecosystem. It is not meant to be a technical session. It's more about an overview of what has happened over the period of last decade and what is likely to happen in the next few years. And I'm pleased to say that India has been innovating in the payment ecosystem like no other country. And we are very pleased to say that we are one of the prominent organizations to be able to provide an excellent innovation. And thanks to organizations like NPCI, we have done something phenomenal, which most other countries are now following on. So we shall answer the questions at the end. And if you do have any questions, please post them on the chat box and we'll answer them one by one on the chat window. Once again, thank you for your interest, and let's start the presentation. So the need for payments and settlements is as old as the need for goods and services. The earliest known payments and settlement system, I would say, was a barter system. And that happened sometime the time immemorial. And then today, I would actually say we have actually moved on to the next generation, but we have also evolved from the check truncation systems. We have moved from various methods of payments and transactions. But now we are actually at the cusp of a revolution. And thanks to the pioneering work done by organizations like NPCI and the regulator like RBI, the payments and settlement system has actually done a phenomenal job of putting a regulatory framework under which the innovations can thrive. But it's interesting to note that the innovation normally precedes regulation. The regulation has to catch up. But we need to create an ecosystem where the regulation enables innovation and not the other way around. And this is where the challenge of ensuring that the safety of the customer's money versus the ability of the customer to do ease of transaction happens. So this creation of this new department, payments and settlement system in 2005 was solely to focus on this, and the Payments and Settlement Act 2007 followed soon. So the digital revolution, as we know, is taking the world by storm. And we know that India has more than 1 billion phones, and we are now seeing mobile first, cloud first, internet enabled solutions that are coming in, and we will talk more about them in detail. The shift in payment preference in the last 10 years is evidenced by the fact that the volume of paper clearing, which comprised 60% of retail payments in 2010-11, has shrunk to less than 3% today. The striking shift in payments has been due to the creation of robust electronic payment systems such as RTGS, NEFT, ECS, and so on. If you look at the basic mode of making payment, it is typically a cash. But if you have seen what have actually evolved, you can actually see we have broadly the credit and debit methods. Within the credit, we have various facilities that are actually there. The popular brands of the interchanges are mentioned on the slide here. On the debit side, we have broadly the bank accounts, the wallets, which are kind of the prepaid instruments that we have. Within the bank accounts, we have the RTGS, NEFT, IMPS, UPI, built on top of one another and complementary to each other. And of course, the net banking, the debit card, the USSD, which is typically used for non-internet based activities. And of course, AEPS, one of the innovations that has actually come out of India, which is Aadhaar enabled payment system. So let's move on to the next slide to see what has actually happened in the retail payment habits. So if you see, till cash has actually been heavily used in India, and people in rural India uses heavy amount of cash, and especially if the transaction size is less than 500 rupees. So this is where I think the shift towards the electronic payments have started happening. Most of us are privy to the fact that we see a lot of things that has happened because of the Google Pays and Paytms of the world, where we see the coconut vendor and other people are doing 10 rupee worth of transactions to electronic mode and payment. But however, cash has been preferred mode in rural India, especially for the very small value transactions. But whenever a transaction goes for a high value, there is an opportunity for the digital payments to take place. Most of the activities that we actually see now having an excellent shift, and we are also seeing that the penetration of the point of sale machine, which is going from the physical POS machine to a electronic soft POS machine, is also taking place. And the revolution of QR code has made it possible for a retail outlet just to use the smartphone as a point of sale machine. So moving on, if you look at in terms of the transactions we do, and Mr. Ramanathan was kind enough to mention about it, in rural India, of the 30,000 villages we cover, we do cash transactions worth $1.9 billion. And we do equal amount of electronic transaction as well. But even in the rural India, we see that transaction in cash continuing to increase, and it is not decreasing. And this is an important aspect of the Indian economy that we need to actually take into cognizance. The cash is not disappearing, but it is complementing. But more and more people are having mobile and internet-enabled mobile. Hence, the percentage of digital transaction is continuing to increase. This is an important aspect. So if we move to the next slide, we are talking about the transactions above 500 are typically happening in digital mode. And what you see on the dark brown is the cash. And what you see on the light brown is on the digital mode. And what you see on the slighter shade is on the check. And the check is always happening on transactions above 2,000 rupees to 5,000 rupees. And that is also dwindling over the period of time. And we would see the electronic digital payments to take place more and more, and the cash as a percentage of the total transaction will come down. And then moving on, the preferred mode of payment to receive, it has been cash. If you take the RBI survey, and if you take the activities that are in check, that is actually a very small percentage. And there are people who want to do transactions when it comes to a low value transaction. And this is actually validating the data provided in the previous slide. So we need to understand when it happens of the total payments, this is the level of digital and cash and other instruments that are being used. Moving on. So the reasons for using digital payments is primarily convenience, right? So the offers and discounts are also one of the main reason in India where the digital payments are used. And then there is also a trust element that happens in the digital payments. And many people have not actually said why they have been using the digital payment. And within the digital payment, you can actually see how it actually pans out. In India, about 96 crore debit cards exist and only about 4 crore credit card exist. But if you take a combination of debit and credit, that is the significant portion of the digital transaction. Even today, although the future would mean the number of debit and credit card transactions will come down, and the UPI has been extremely popular, and in terms of volume and value, we'll see in the next few slides about how it is increasing. So the one area which we need to still understand is there is lack of point of sale connectivity in certain parts of India, and the digital transaction happening in those places are relatively low. And there are also other reasons, especially the unsafe transactions, security, decline of transactions, and not getting it credited and debited at the same time, are all the other reasons why there is some inhibition in using the retail payments. So the UPI transaction, as you can see, is all-time high of 12.82 lakh crores. That's phenomenal, and that is unimaginable few years ago. The volume is so high, it's touching almost 8,000 million. And then the value of, as we have seen, is the 12.82 lakh crores. So the innovation of UPI is also going to be exported to other countries in the world. And we believe that there is going to be more innovation in UPI, especially how to enable credit transactions to happen in the UPI. So let me actually just start with the basis of the card business. And I think the credit, debit, prepaid, and wallet are the broad areas of the card payments. I would now request my colleague Pradeep to actually take over from here and give an overview of the different modes in the digital payments.
Thank you, Mahesh. So as you could see, or as you would have discussed, right, like, that there are very few digital payment methods, or we can kind of club the digital payment method into these four aspects, right? Wherever you're not dealing with a non-cash, you could look at it that way. So one is the credit card, right? And as Mahesh was mentioning, the number of credit card users are kind of very less, and the debit card users are much more higher because the debit card is linked to your bank account, and debit card is where you spend the money that you have, right? And credit card is something that, like, where you're kind of spending against the future, which means you kind of borrow the money and then you pay the money at a later point of time. The prepaid cards are kind of special cases, like, say, for example, think about your Sodexo or think about your food cards, or where you're kind of saying that, hey, you know what, I'm going to load this card with certain amount of money, and we'll probably kind of use that particular money that is being parked out for it. Sometimes it could be for very special cases, right? Like, say, I can take an example of Sodexo, which means you could use it predominantly for your food-related purchases or grocery-related purchases. And if you use the same Sodexo card for some other purposes, the particular merchant may or may not accept the Sodexo card, even though you might have money towards it. So you can think about fuel expenses card and things like that, or even the movie cards, where you kind of load the money for one particular kind of an expenditure or a particular kind of a transaction. E-wallet is kind of interesting. Like, again, as the word suggests, so the name suggests, it is like your wallet, but it is in the digital format. You can kind of link your bank account, you can link your credit card, you can link your prepaid card, and sometimes you can also park your money the way that how you keep your cash in your wallet, right? So whenever you kind of make the transaction, either you could preload, you can pick and choose the card, right? Like, say, for example, you try one transaction, it really doesn't work out, your card doesn't work, then you kind of stop the other card. So similarly, you can pick and choose the payment method to the e-wallet stuff, right? Yeah, as we were kind of discussing it a little earlier as well, right? Like, there are, in India, there are around 94 crore debit cards, but there is only 6 crore credit cards, right? You will see a huge gap. This is like, people say that whenever you see a problem, like, there is also a kind of a good solution or a challenge, there is an opportunity as well. So it really kind of begs the question, why is that you have more debit cards and you have very less credit cards? So the question that comes to your mind is, one, is it because that we can't give more credit cards to more people? What are the challenges in issuing more credit cards? Is it that the companies do not want to give credit card, or people not getting the credit card? Is it the willingness, or is it that there is some kind of a structural challenge in terms of the issuance of the credit card? Or is it the nature and the psyche of the consumer that is out over there? So which means there is a huge potential for people to access more credit and this credit cards to kind of go up. So that is a very, very huge opportunity that is out over there. And it is worthwhile kind of double clicking or deep diving in terms of why that happens. And if you're keen to understand more in terms of it, you should join our course and then discuss more in terms of data to understand how you can increase the number of the credit cards to it. Next slide, please. So the interoperability among all this kind of different financial instruments is also a very interesting stuff, right? So it would also kind of make more sense or spend some time to understand what is the interoperability that means, because sometimes it happens all on its own. We don't even realize that interoperability that exists or the beauty of it or the challenge that is out there. We will talk about the challenge a little later in the slides, but let's focus on interoperability for now, right? So think that, like, let's say that you have, let's say that an Airtel SIM, and what if you can talk only to the Airtel SIM users, right? And you can't talk to Jio users or you can't talk to the Vodafone users, that will be kind of pretty bad, right? So which means you have interoperability in terms of the telecom players, which means you call to any number, irrespective of this kind of service provider. If you take this particular same example much more closer to the banking transaction, let's say that you have an ATM card from State Bank of India. And if you can withdraw money only from State Bank of India, it is not that very much helpful, or it may not come in handy if you want to borrow money from some other ATM that is nearby or whenever you want it, right? So which means you can kind of use this ATM card to borrow money from all the other places. That is the interoperability in terms of card transactions within the ATM. So similarly, what the RBI said is like, you can't have a closed ecosystem or a closed loop among the wallet and the PPA issuers, right? As the prepaid card, prepaid instruments. So every wallet should kind of work with all the other wallets, right? And that is the basis of the UPI as well. And this is enforced, and that is why you can have any other app and then you can send the money across to any other app as well, right? And this is also something much more interesting, because even though it has been out over there, you could also see the service providers are doing some sort of an ads, right? You would have seen that, like, the ads, people saying that when I pay through the GPay, the merchant says, hey, I have only this particular app, will it accept? Then the ad goes on to say that, hey, you can accept any app to any app and things like that, right? Similarly, you would have also seen the other app who would come and then say that, like, even for the peer-to-peer, I have this particular app, and how probably you're not having this particular app in your phone, but you should have this app, but still I can send it from my particular app and so on, right? And so as a result of this is not happening on its own because the players felt that, hey, consumers, it is the RBI who came in and then said that interoperability has to be mandatory for it. And that is also one of the reasons why we see a matter rate rise in the terms of the UPI transactions, because interoperability exists, you're not having any other concerns on that. Even though we say that, hey, interoperability exists, it is also a little bit much more challenging and much more complex, rather than, like, getting the money from a different ATM or, like, talking to another service provider in the telecom. We will move on and then see, like, what are the other challenges or why such challenges does exist, right? So this is how the money flow happens whenever you're making any sort of a transaction, right? Like, it could be different transactions. We will also talk about the nature of the transactions, but for the sake of simplicity, we say that you are a consumer, you want to buy something else, right? You do not know whether it is an online or an offline from a website or from a shop, but basically you have one particular card. It could be an SBI card from your end, right? But whereas you go and then use it with a merchant who probably would have it from a different bank, like, he might bank with Axis, he might bank with an ICICI or any other thing. That would be the merchant acquirer or the merchant bank. Then you could be using your Visa card or a MasterCard or a RuPay or sometimes even an Amex, which may not go through the same payment flow transaction, but it could even be an American Express network or a RuPay network, which is the Indian One network, right? Then, which means you also have an issuer, and that is your issuer, where is the card that it comes from, and all that. So whenever you make a transaction, it has to kind of go through all of these people, and each and every one has to say that, okay, fine, I'm authorizing this particular transaction, and not only do they have to authorize the transaction, they also have to make a settlement, right? So what the settlement means is money moves from your pocket to the merchant's pocket, or from your bank account to the merchant's bank account. And this is exactly the value chain it goes on. So which means we will see how the money is kind of divided up, because each and every person in this particular flow is providing some service and then add some value to it. And the service doesn't come free, right? Like, because each and every one has to be paid, and how the money gets divided up, we will kind of look at it into the next slides, please. So the reason it is also this, right? Like, say, for example, whenever you make a transaction, you as a person would be using multiple kind of devices or multiple kind of an instruments. So similarly, even the merchant would have different payment infrastructure. You would be familiar with the POS where you go and then swipe the card and then you then tap the card. And sometimes, like, the merchant would also have this mobile point of a sale where, which means you kind of put like, think about a Mozambique point of a sale, which is much more smaller in places, and which means you can kind of take it. This is something where people nowadays bring it to your, payment on delivery kind of a thing, or a digital payment on delivery, or in much more smaller shops, you would also see this mobile point of sale. The soft POS is much more interesting, where your mobile phone gets converted into the point of sale machine, which means you can kind of tap your particular card on the mobile, and then your mobile phone becomes a point of sale machine, and then it can accept the payments. The QR code is something that which we are much more familiar with, and the QR codes can be the universal QR codes, right? One thing that which we are usually kind of familiar with it is the UPI based QR codes, but in general, the QR code can even accept a digital payment based, like, any sort of digital payment, which means you can kind of connect it with a credit card or even a debit card or any other payment mode, and still the QR code will be able to accept the payment. So this is what would happen from the merchant side in terms of what are the mechanisms or what are the options that they have to collect cash in a digital way in addition to the cash. So now let's move on to the consumers in the next slide. So, but again, this is also something like, how we kind of transact each and every time. So the card present is when you actually kind of have the card, and you could also do an contactless or where you tap and pay. The card not present transaction is where you kind of use it on the online and the website to make any purchases, right? And even though the card present and the card not present has their very own implications in terms of how the acquirer or the processor kind of looks at it, and as a result, even the payment kind of very differ, because the card present, the instances of the fraud is much less, because you would say that, I'm owning the card, and then you as a owner of the card, you could also sometimes sign it. Nowadays, no one signs it, or no one asks you for the sign. But for high value transactions, you would also see some people kind of giving the receipt and then asking you to sign it, right? So there have been regulations in terms of treating predominantly to manage the fraud resolution and then the dispute resolution aspects of it. So the payment aggregator versus the payment gateway is also a much more interesting way to look at it. In terms of the payment gateway is the one which kind of process out when you're making an online transaction, right? So which means they kind of orchestrate the entire transaction once when you enter the card details, or even when you pick and choose your payment methodology in terms of is it I'm going to make a bank transaction, or am I going to make an UPI transaction? So the payment gateways are the one which will facilitate all sort of movement from the money from you all the way towards the merchant account. They are the ones who will also kind of help towards the authorization and the settlement by the respective players who have to authorize and as well as the settle the money in terms of the accounts, right? Whereas the payment aggregator from the offline space is where it makes much more sense to look at them from the offline spaces. They are the ones which aggregate all sort of payment mechanisms or all sort of payment modes, right? Like, you use multiple cards, multiple banks, and multiple networks. They are the ones who would kind of aggregate all of this. So next slide, please. So this is how exactly it happens, right? So which means you have to pay for the pipes which will kind of move the money towards it. And as you can see that, like, the collection charges from either the issuer side or the acquirer side or even the network side remains more or less the same, whether you're using an offline mode where the card is present or where you make a tap and pay method, versus the website which is the card not present, because which means you are actually kind of not issuing the card, right? You have the card details with you, but the card is not actually present when you make the transactions, or it does the physical one of the card is not involved. But you could also see that, like, the payment by the processor, right? Like, like in the case of offline mode, it could be someone like a Paytm, because Paytm does both online as well as an offline. So if you take a payment processor like a Paytm, even the finance is kind of forayed now into the online kind of way you kind of as a payment gateway business as well. You will see that there is this very still, you might think that hey, it is 0.1 versus 0.25, but still when you consider the thin margin business or when you consider the volume of the transactions, it really makes a very big difference to the merchant, because they really have to shell out that kind of a money, right? So which means if you're actually kind of paying 100 rupees to a merchant, and more especially once when you make a payment to them via non-cash, which means the money gets split into all of these things. So when you say that when I make a 100 rupees transaction for a particular product or a particular solution, the merchant who uses a non-cash payment or a non-cash methodology to accept the payment, they will actually kind of see a reduction in the 2 rupees. They will get only 98% or 98 rupees, right? So which means they end up paying 2% of the entire transaction to somebody else, whereas the 2% would be kind of divided upon the issuer. The issuer is somebody, the card that you use, right? Like say, for example, the customer's card, they actually can take the 1.6. The acquirer from the merchant side will take a 0.25%, and the network will take 0.15 irrespective of your payment methodology. And all across the processor will either take a 0.1 versus 0.25 or 0.35, depending on the card, depending on the method, and how much risk they kind of look at it, right? Like now, like back to Mahesh to talk about much more interesting stuff.
Thank you, Pradeep. I think it was wonderful. I think some of the most interesting concept that was outlined by Pradeep is, so you need to actually take this if you don't know already. So the card issued by a bank, they are called the issuer. The merchant who is actually collecting the payment, there's a POS deployed by another bank, they are the acquirer, and there are interchange and technical service providers, payment gateways in between. And if it is offline, in person, it's called the payment aggregator. And if it's an online, no card present, it's called the payment gateway. And while doing all this transaction, there are two key things that happen. One is the authentication. The second one is the authorization. The authentication is about, are you the person who you claim you are? The authorization is about, do you have the money that you are supposed to transact? So these are the important things that we'll actually talk more in depth when we talk about all this. And one of the other interesting aspects that has happened in the recent history in the Indian payment ecosystem is, when you have a payment like a UPI or a QR code or even a RuPay processed, I think by whatever wisdom, the regulator has said that there is no charges that are actually being posed to the person who's receiving the payment or person who's making the payment. So how does it work? I think it's actually only the data monetization that can actually make it sustainable. And otherwise, it's going to be extremely tough for any startup which actually says that I'm actually into the UPI business, but the margins are extremely tough unless you do a value-added business on all of this. And the QR code is also becoming extremely popular. And as Pradeep was explaining, we are very familiar with that. And there are two modes in that. One is actually the dynamic QR code, and the second one is actually the static QR code. Static QR code are basically, you only identify the merchant. The dynamic QR code also says this is the amount you are supposed to do. So where did all of this innovations happen? This innovation happened through National Payments Corporation of India, an umbrella corporation that actually does all the retail payments and settlements in India. It is an initiative of the RBI and an Indian Bankers Association. It's a not-for-profit organization that has actually been in existence from 2007 Act. And there may be other similar institutions that may come in the future called the new umbrella entity, but it is still not in place. So considering the utility nature of the NPCI, as a not-for-profit organization, its intent is to make sure that there are more transactions happening and more throughput is happening and more reliability is happening. And the 10 core promoter banks are the SBI, PNB, Canara Bank, Bank of Baroda, Union Bank, so on and so forth. And there are a lot of private sector banks. In 2016, the shareholding was broad-based to 56 member banks. And that is what the NPCI is all about. And then the NUE, as I said, is the RBI's initiative to see if they can have equivalent organizations similar to NPCI. And that will also be a Section 8 company, and it is expected to be applied by large corporations who have a paid-up capital of above 500 crores. So this is not in place yet, but this is in the discussion that is happening. And they would also do something similar to the NPCI. So instead of having a reliability on one organization, the government of India and the RBI is trying to do this into multiple organizations. So we see here a lot of terminologies like ECS, NEFT, Bharat Bill Pay, BEAM, etc. And you may actually know or be familiar with each of these things, but it is also important for us to understand what each one of that means. The Bharat Bill Pay is another innovation, I would actually say, that has happened in India, where instead of us having to have a connection to every bill that has to be paid, to a school, to a utility bill payment, to any other provider, the Bharat Bill Pay is trying to act as a hub where they connect to every other biller, and the organization we have to work with can actually interface with Bharat Bill Pay, so it becomes much easier. So the RTGS is about the real-time gross settlement. So the funds are transferred immediately and instantaneously, and that is why it's called the real-time gross settlement. And that means the amount is not a net settlement. Whatever transaction happens from A to B happens instantaneously. On the other side is the NEFT, which is the batch-based process. It has actually increased in the batch times today, but the most important thing is the size of the transaction has to be of a certain size, like 2 lakh rupees or more for an RTGS, and NEFT can have much lower transaction size. And a nationwide centralized payment system, that NEFT is owned by the RBI. The fund transfer system of RTGS has a lot more transaction that happens in real world. So we spoke a lot about NPCI. I actually have to give a lot more credit for the innovations that have actually come up in India. And I think NPCI is one of the pioneer in this area. And they also have a division of NPCI, which is actually about exporting the innovations that have happened in India, like UPI, to other countries which are actually following through, including the RuPay. For example, the benefit of a RuPay is that we have a indigenous national card system. And what has happened to Russia during the Ukraine war is they were actually left dry because the US decided to actually switch off some of the Visa MasterCard systems. And this problem will not happen for a country like India because RuPay is much more evolved as an indigenous payment system. And the ECS is mainly for the electronic mode of fund transfer. And it is similar to the national automated transactions. And we can also see that NACH is the automated clearinghouse that facilitate the interbank transactions. And it is mainly for high volume electronic transaction, which we are doing in a repetitive nature. So I think we spoke about the Bharat Bill Pay. The most important thing is we are able to do this bill payment from anywhere to anytime. That's a very important thing. The other major innovation I would say in India is the Aadhaar enabled payment system. So with an Aadhaar enabled payment system, a micro ATM or a point of sale machine, typically with a biometric, which means a fingerprint scanner, is deployed for the business correspondents across India. The role of a business correspondent is to actually service the unbanked and underbanked people in the rural India where there are no physical bank branches. Because if you have a physical bank branches, the cost of transaction for a low value transaction will be very high. So India has about 648,000 villages, but only about less than 200,000 villages have a bank branch. So in order to facilitate banking transaction, these business facilitator or business correspondent act like a human ATM, and they are mapped to a nearest bank. And typically the government to citizen benefits, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme wages, and all the other activities are paid through this. The bank gets the credit and the business correspondent collect the money and then distribute it to the citizens in the village. They act like a extended cashier, and all of this is enabled through the AEPS transaction. And even in AEPS, there can be an honors and offers transaction, which means the customer can actually have account with the same bank as the AEPS devices connected to, or it can be another bank. So it is typically like an ATM, but only difference is instead of a physical machine-based ATM, here it is going to be a human who's acting like an ATM. And the advantage of this method is it is very cost effective, and also that you can actually do deposit through this as well. So that is how this is actually evolved, the business correspondent model. And IMPS is actually one of the most interesting evolution in the transaction. It actually enables immediate payment services that happen. Many of the other innovations have happened on top of IMPS. So National Electronic Toll Collection has been developed to meet the electronic tolling requirements of the Indian market, as it offers nationwide toll payment, including the clearinghouse services for settlement and dispute management. I think today we have this FASTag as a way, and it uses the radio frequency identification or RFID, as we know, to do all this. And most of us who travel in the national highway or other toll roads, we actually use RFID. Even in airports, they have started to use RFID based FASTag today. And that's an interesting way of doing it. And we also spoke about the USSD as an interesting way of doing transaction in a non-internet enabled mobile phone. So while the India has a lot of mobile phones, and I think there is still a hesitancy or lot of lack of knowledge to use digital payments through an app. So some of the people who are still having the feature phone, they can still use UPI transaction through what's known as the USSD or unstructured supplementary service data. It's a complex terminology, but all you can do is you can even try yourself. You press *99 and hash, and then you will see a menu that actually comes in where you can actually say send, receive, or check balance, etc. And you would actually be able to do the transaction even if you don't have any Wi-Fi or mobile data connection. And that is actually not picked off, but it has got a great potential. I think it's still underused. And of course, UPI, I can actually spend a lot of time talking about UPI. I think it powers multiple bank accounts into a single mobile application. That's the beauty of it. You just put your mobile number, all the bank accounts that are mapped to your mobile are displayed, and then you can actually use it. And then you use something called the virtual payment address, which means that I can have an account with XYZ bank, and then I can use my mobile number at XYZ bank as my ID. It's like an email ID, but it can actually be mapped not only to the XYZ bank, I can later make it to point to another bank and it will still function. And if you use one of the app called the Beam, which we'll actually touch upon, your mobile number at UPI will typically be used as the UPI virtual payment address. And UPI is actually taken everybody into a very different league because people don't have to remember the bank account number or the IFSC code. They just have to remember the UPI, and even the mobile number at UPI or any mobile number itself is enough going forward to make sure that money transfer can actually take place. And there are a lot of innovations that are happening on top of UPI. One of the interesting things that I would say is the credit card connect to the UPI, and you can actually see that happening in RuPay credit card already. So the benefits broadly are the immediate money transfer, a single mobile application, virtual address, you don't have to reveal your bank account detail. You can map it to a different bank account that you want. And you can even do bill splitting for restaurant bill. You can actually transfer part of the payment. You can do a lot of other things. So today you actually see many of the innovations that has happened is on top of the UPI system. So the BIM is actually a UPI application that's called the Bharat Interface for Money. And this app uses the UPI, and that BIM also has two features, one for the individual user who wants to send money, and you can also behave as a merchant to receive money through BIM. And there are a lot of other applications that actually exist to collect money. And BIM by default has actually been able to do a lot of these activities that are like collect money or send money or use QR code to send it. And then you can also do transaction history. You can add your profile. You can change the language. So you can actually pretty much use 14 Indian languages there. And then you can also block certain users because you may sometimes receive an SMS saying that XYZ is asking money for this. And you have to be extremely careful that all of this request for money is, unless you know, you should not actually do the payment to those addresses. So the next one we are talking about is the Clearing Corporation of India. I'm just trying to complete this. It provides the guaranteed clearing and settlement function, and especially in the GSEX, foreign exchange and derivative markets. I think I've covered the overview here. My request is now for Pradeep to talk about the future of where this is all going.
So if you've been like very attentive in terms of what Mahesh was speaking, right? So you would see that the recurring theme or the repetitive theme or the most overused word was innovation, right? Of course, India has been innovating, or it has been at the forefront of payments or forefront of the fintech. So that kind of begs the question, hey, are we kind of reached the very high level of what is left over to innovate and what not, right? So the way to think about it is whatever that has been happening, we are still at like, on day zero or at day one or the beginning of the journey. But you could also kind of see that, like say, for example, there has been an underlying infrastructure that has been built where people can come on to the infrastructure and then build a lot of stuff over there, right? But at the same time, it is also not that easy. So we will kind of start wondering, why is that, it is the innovation challenge is like much more interesting, or like, why it is easy or why it is difficult, or what is the potential out over there. So the whole reason or the primary reason why there is a huge scope for innovation that is out over there is money is getting digitized day in and day out, right? Like, it is becoming more zeros and ones as well as, right? Like as Mike said in the very beginning, the cash is actually kind of complementing the digital journey, and the digital journey is complementing the cash as well, right? But still at the end of the day, money is getting digitized, right? So once when the money is getting digitized, it becomes much more easier to kind of play around or to kind of make it much more easier because software is eating the world and there are a lot of APIs that is needs to be done. So as a function of all of these things, what really happening is like the digitization of the money is kind of helping towards the innovation in the fintech, right? You could do a lot more things towards it. You can think about digital money or the digital currencies and whatnot. And that is one of the reasons why RBI is kind of piloting the UP and whatnot, right? So let's kind of deep dive and then double click of the other aspects. So what are the challenges in terms of innovating it, right? Like, the strength is also the kind of weakness. We just saw that, hey, the money is kind of getting digitized, right? So once when the money is kind of getting digitized, it means it is becoming the bits and bytes and the zeros and the ones, right? So which means it becomes also a much more an easy target to be hacked, easy target to kind of take the money out over there. And not only that, your privacy is also kind of violated a little bit, right? Of course, there are many other ways to kind of handle privacy as well. Take an example of the UPI payment aspect, right? So whenever someone asks, like, what can I want to make an UPI payment to it, what we kind of do is we share our mobile number, right? Like, we are kind of sharing our mobile number to a lot of people. May or may not be a good people or a bad people, right? Like, we do not know, but still we end up sharing the mobile number whenever we make a payment to it, or the mobile number is visible to them. Of course, the government or the people of the architect of the UPS, that is why they have created the virtual payment address where you can use your mail ID kind of a thing, where your mobile number is not revealed and whatnot. But how many of us kind of use the VPA feature rather than the mobile number feature, right? We usually kind of say that, hey, this is my GPay number. This is my Paytm number, or this is my phone pay number. That is what we normally say, rather than saying that just transfer it to Pradeep at SB or Pradeep at ICICI or any of that stuff, right? We don't do it. So which means this is not only from the UPI aspect of it, but even in the other aspect of it, the security and the privacy becomes a much more bigger challenge to it. So which means whenever you're innovating, you always need to keep the security and the privacy at the back of your mind when you're innovating. And when you're innovating, it is always at the forefront of the regulation, or you're moving ahead in terms of the regulation. So which means you are also kind of constrained by the regulation as well, right? Like next slide, please. So the regulation is also a much more a critical factor, which or the other way to look at it is a challenge in terms of innovation. Right? Like say, if you're keenly watching this particular sector, you will also see that, like, sometime back RBI came with some sort of a regulation, and as a result of that, many business models in terms of the credit or in terms of the buy now pay later, in terms of how they were operating, kind of got impacted. So, which means, is it good move or is it a bad move? Like, the jury is still out over there. But one thing that you really have to keep in mind is that whenever you're kind of innovating, you will be at way ahead of the regulation. So, which means why is that there is a need for a regulation? Right? It becomes because it is money, right? People are very much worried about the money, and whenever there is money involved, it also attracts a lot of players, which will lot of not so good players, which means it becomes an essential component to ensure that there are sufficient railroads or sufficient protections in place, so that, like, there are no bad actors, the external bad actors or the people who run this, all of these agencies themselves say that, like, what, you can't do it, right? Like take US stock market versus Indian stock market, or even in terms of the payment gateway as well as, whereas the Indian regulation or Indian RBI is much more effective and much more strong in terms of how the money should flow, right? So for example, whenever you make a payment to the payment gateway and all of that stuff, the government or the regulation says that, hey, all of this money has to be in this particular bank account, and you have to intend the money to that particular usage only and not for anything else, right? So which means the money has to lie out over there, and nobody who's operating any of these exchanges or any of this payment gateway or a processor can access the money, right? You could actually do a T+1 or a T+2 settlement, but at the end of the day, still you have to do a settlement, and it has to stay in that particular account, and you can't use it for anything else, right? You can't say that I will park the money in particular account to play around with that money. That is not happening. So which means there is a strong need for the regulator to say how exactly all of these things should work, right? And this is very, very essential whenever you're kind of innovating. You need this, but you have to kind of play around with the sandbox, or you have to kind of play within the rules and regulations the government says. So we have spoken a lot more in terms of the regulation, but again, these are all the players who kind of play in terms of what the challenge is in terms of the innovation, right? Like as we say, spoke a lot about RBI Again, you can't do anything and everything without the explicit permission of the RBI. If you don't get an explicit permission, the RBI would come back and then do. So what it also means that any innovation that is placed out of the regulatory arbitrage will not be there for a very long time, right? Like, it has a very limited shelf period, a very limited time period, post that the RBI is going to take cognizance of it and then it's going to come down and then say that you can't play around with it. So you are far more better off being a regulated entity rather than being an unregulated entity. More especially when you're offering something, financial services, or whenever you're dealing with money in a regular basis. If you're going to be a pure tech player that will help others to make money or to play around with the money, that's a different thing, right? And the permission and support from the government, it goes without saying, until and unless the government hasn't come up with something like NPCA, if the government is not thinking something about the NUE or any of all the other infrastructure that which Mahesh was talking about, it, you really cannot do it. At the same time, again, you can't go far away or you can't do something unregulated and all that. The security is a paramount stuff, right? Because at the end of the day, it is about money, and then whenever you're moving money, you really cannot play around with the money. And support and the acceptance from the banks, right? Like, this is something that it has been an ongoing debate, but I think people have finally come to the conclusion that, like, banks are necessary because banks play a very critical role in terms of making all this innovation happening, or still to kind of move the money around, and even in the terms of the aspect of the trust, right? Think about any of the fintech innovation that we have seen, be it the FASTag or be it the UPI or USSD or any of these things. If you really think about it, everything happens on the shoulders of this giants called as the banks, or without the bank, all of these things really will not happen, right? So which means they kind of support it, and any innovation has to kind of happen again with the blessing of the bank or with the support of the bank. Or if you can do it along with the bank, then it becomes much more easier, right? We can again talk about so-called credit models or the new age credit models or the new age business models. If you really think about it, all that still happened with the help of the banking partner, right? Or even if you think about the new age lending models, the regulator is very clear that the money has to move from the bank to the customer and from the customer to the bank, and not necessarily the fancy UI or the UX player or who kind of helps the banks to acquire the customer. They can only do XYZ step, and then they can have access to XYZ data of the customer, right? So which means still the banks will play a very critical role or a very strong role. The last part is much more interesting and a much more critical one of it, until and unless people are much more comfortable with whatsoever that you're using, right? Like, the ease of usability should be much more, should be there. If not, the acceptance will not happen out over there. I think the best classic example is the Paytm voice box, because they were the pioneers. Now there are other players who have copied it or who kind of replicated that. But now if you even think about it, right, you go and then scan it. Earlier you used to kind of show the screenshot or show the screen of your mobile to the vendor that you have made the payment, right? Even though people are using it, but there is some sort of a friction, right? There is a higher chance for you to kind of commit fraud to show some other screenshots that you would have done it and whatnot, which means it becomes much more difficult for them to also kind of take the mobile and then see whether the payment is coming or not. But now you kind of make it much more easy. You put a voice box, and then whenever you make a payment, there is a bit says that the payment accepted and this is the money that came in. It gives a much more comfort to the vendor, right? You need not show your mobile, the vendor need not go check his mobile because there is an audio that you have made the payment, and he also knows that the payment has kind of come to his bank. This is one particular use of example in terms of how it is use of usability comes in. You can think about such similar use cases with multiple other offerings or multiple other facets of it. And if you can kind of overcome all these kind of challenges, or if you can factor in all these kind of challenges in the way that you're innovating, it would kind of make much more sense, right? And the trust and the reliability is a much more interesting factor in any innovation that you kind of do it, right? So until unless people trust that it can happen, people will never be more happy or accepting your solution. Reliability is a much more very critical factor. So think about this. Let's say that each and every time you take your mobile to scan, and then none of the time or majority of the time that if the money doesn't go through or if the scan doesn't happen, which means it is not reliable, right? So until unless you're reliable, then you will always say that, oh, if you go and then scan, it is not going to work or it is not going to be very proper. So why am I supposed to deal with it? Let me take the cash out and then pay it, right? So you have to trust the player. Like, let's say that if you think that the money is not safe in the bank, you just go and then start taking out the money from the bank, so which means that is what called as the bank, right? So the most important aspect in the entire financial system or any innovation in the financial system is that you need to have the trust, or you need to earn the trust of the customer. This is in addition to the existing guardrails that is out over there, that is by the regulator in terms of regulation, in terms of compliance, in terms of security. Beyond above and beyond all of that, you need to earn the trust of the customer, or your innovation should earn the trust of the customer. So this is something that, like, I would strongly recommend to kind of keep it in the mind, because you really do not know how exactly each and every technology that is out will play out over there, right? So one example is, like, again, let's take a UPI, which we have been talking along about it, right? If you kind of time travel back 5 years, and then if you kind of look at it and then say that, hey, will UPI be much more successful, or will it be this popular, or gain wider acceptance? Probably no, right? Like, there has been a higher chance people would have said that, oh, you know what, every bank has to come in, or there are only this many number of banks. It will take a lot of time to kind of do it. So nobody would have kind of guessed or expected that, like, within 5 years, we will do this huge amount of transactions, and this is how the acceptance, the ticket size will grow and all that stuff. At the same time, if you look at credit cards have been there for a very long time, but still we also saw the number of credit cards are still out over there, right? So whenever you're kind of innovating and then you're thinking about technology, sometimes you might say that, hey, it will shoot up like crazy, but it may not. And sometimes you will say that, hey, it will not, but it will kind of go on. So it is very, very difficult. And that's what also makes the innovation and the innovating within the tech makes it much more challenging as well, because it becomes very, very difficult to predict what will work and what will not work, and how it will hit the escape velocity to get a larger and a wider acceptance. Any prediction in terms of the future is uncertain, and we can be very, very sure about that. Yeah, Mahesh, over to you.
Thank you, Pradeep. That was a very interesting insights that you actually shared. So it was in 2009, we actually launched the indigenous payment card for India. This was much before the RuPay card. And even then we actually introduced NFC based tap and pay mode. The point that I'm actually trying to make here is, when you are actually trying to innovate, look at actually Bharat as a customer. And if you go to the next slide, you can actually see that the micro businesses continue to evolve and the cash remains king in India. So there is a lot more opportunity for the digital to grow beyond what it is today. We think it is already there, but if you look at the tier 3 to tier 6 towns and villages, we have a lot of potential there. So I think the point I'm trying to make here is the number of payment companies will reduce because of the way that the consolidation will happen. It's a very big topic, but in the interest of time, I will actually just mention this and move on to the next few slides and then conclude this. So yes, the COVID has actually been instrumental in actually accelerating the digital transformation. Every small shop to big shops to individuals started adopting digital payments, because that's the way that the remote payments can start to happen. And it has actually accelerated during COVID. Yes, the digital instruments will be on the rise. The banks will actually be the regulated and trusted entity. So will be the NBFCs. All other players have to partner with them. So the RBI will be very particular on that. So this will be an interesting trend to watch for. Yeah, the incumbent is a new disruptor, but again, the important point is it has to be regulated entity, and that is what the RBI will continue to insist. Any innovation happening in the fintech startups, it has to align with the RBI guideline, and that is very important. Otherwise, there will be surprises. I think we can actually move on to the next few slides. I think it's all very easy to see the contactless payments will continue to rule. It will become very important evolution. Already we can actually use that. Micro businesses will go digital. Absolutely, yes. Payment queues will be eliminated. Yes. I think the philanthropy and donation is a very big area where there is going to be some very interesting trend that we will actually see, where the digital payments will become all the more important, because this is going to be the next big wave that we'll watch. I think the financial literacy and universal financial health is very important. So financial inclusion is very important. When we talk about India as a country, we need to look at the inclusive growth, and we need to look at the billion people who have to be addressed, and not just the 300 million who are actually the privileged people who have got all the smartphone and internet access. So any solution you develop has to include all the people who are in different parts of India. I have actually used a lot of information from this RBI paper called The Journey in the Second Decade of the Millennium from the RBI. You can actually look at this. We would like to thank all the sources from RBI to NPCI to Payment Council of India, and all the other people from my colleague Swami and all the good people who have given me that information. I will actually conclude here, and I will wait for further questions to come from the audience, and we will take questions from now on.
Yeah, we move to the Q&A now. Any questions? I mean, there is one question already, Mr. Mahesh and Pradeep. It's from Sanjana. She's saying, okay, how do you think we can break the stigma around online payments? Following this question, my friend and I are leading a startup that designs comic books on financial literacy. It will be an honor to receive your valuable guidance on this project. For this, is it possible to get a personal point of contact? Thank you. The question is, how do you think we can break the stigma around online payments?
Thank you, Sanjana. What you are doing is a very interesting startup, and it's going to be very important to have financial literacy. And I do actually believe that I've taken cognizance of the vernacular language in this version, and also the comic is a great way of bringing on the financial literacy. We can actually take an offline. You can actually get in touch with Kriya. They will be happy to share our contact so that we can actually take a offline conversation on this. Pradeep, do you want to add to this?
No, like I think the government is also kind of, they have a financial literacy program which is run by the central government, which even provides like more like a hands-on demo. But I think the comic books will be much more effective because, but as Mahesh was mentioning, it would kind of factor in the local vernacular languages, and I think this is a very great way to do the financial literacy, because unless we provide financial literacy, we will not be able to break the stigma on the online payments. Yeah.
Sanjana, I mean, even your question has been answered. I'm allowing you to talk, therefore you can ask the question if you want any further question on this.
Thank you so much for answering the question, and I'll definitely talk to the Kriya admin about meeting for discussing this project further, because essentially we want to tackle rural places in the Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu border, and we're aiming towards children. So I'm so happy that we could possibly discuss this. And I don't think I have any follow-up questions, but yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Welcome. Any other question from anybody else? So we could move on. I will just take a few minutes to share one of the programs, okay, that is going to be launched and led by Mahesh and Pradeep. But before that, I think someone has raised a hand. Kalyan Raman has raised a hand. 1 minute. I mean, let me. Yeah, Kalyan Raman, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And the question is, we have moved from cash to digital cash now.
Yeah.
Is there a possibility, the question may sound a bit weird, but is there a possibility that we move back into barter system by any chance? I mean, perhaps 5 stages from now, it's not going to be the next evolution. 5 stages from now, perhaps, is there a thought process that perhaps we will move to a barter system? Because we don't see cash now. So where is this leading us to? As thought leaders, I thought I would pose this question to you. And if there is no answer also, it's absolutely fine. I just thought I would check with you, get your thoughts on this, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kalyan Raman. I will actually start with the thought process. There are evolution that has happened from the barter to the check to the other methods and to the digital, etc. And there's a lot more cash that is in existence in India today, especially in the rural India. And it will take a little bit of time for us to even move that to the digital. And there are situations where the barter might make sense, but I'm not sure whether there is any specific ecosystem that is actually promoting it in a way that it could be a main mode of payment system. But I will allow my colleague Pradeep also to share his view.
Hey, thanks for the very interesting question, right? So as we were kind of reiterating towards the presentation, cash has not gone anywhere despite the explosion in the digital, right? Both cash as well as digital has been going together very fast. But as you were were asking about I was actually kind of, after you asked it, I was wondering, hey, what is the reason, or why would we even go back to the barter, right? What would stop us to stop using mobile phones, stop us using airplanes, and then go back to the boxes and walking the way that how it used to be? Maybe the internet goes away, maybe the digital infrastructure goes away, or somebody invents time machine and then go back maybe 200 years, 300 years back, then probably barter system would come into the play. That would be one interesting scenario where the barter system comes back into the
Yeah, does it answer your question?
Yes, it has answered in part. Am I allowed to delayer this a bit? Does the time permit, or I can always check it with the Kriya team? I mean, perhaps in the
You can
future.
make it quick. You can make it quick.
Thank you. Right. Yes, it was prevalent 300 years ago. However, history also teaches us that what is presumed to be gone some time ago comes back, be it in terms of the ruling system, be it in terms of the way people exchange ideas and communication that happened between them. There was one disruption that we have seen 3 years ago, and the world is yet to come out of it in many ways. And so perhaps when the next disruption comes, I'm just thinking wild, and something happens to the currency system, the cash, and don't think that I come from the Neanderthal age, but I'm only asking, perhaps 5 stages from now, will technology allow us to go completely on an exchange mode like barter, in a completely new avatar? I'm saying we may not go 300 years behind.
Thank you, Kalyan Raman. Mahesh, Pradeep, can we move on, or would you like to say anything?
You can go on, Mr. Ramanathan. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Any further questions? Others? So allow us a few more minutes, and I'll just take you through the program, okay, that is being launched, led by Mahesh and Pradeep, along with a few other faculty. This is going to be essentially aimed at, okay, you could be a technologist, okay, who would want to foray into the financial service industry, or, okay, you could be a financial industry veteran, okay, who wants to understand a little more about how technology can help in your digital transformation journey, or you could be simply interested to understand the disruptions and innovations in the fintech industry and how you can contribute to the society. And some of the key highlights here is it's going to be led by the pioneers. Why we call ourselves pioneers? Because even before anyone thought about evangelizing financial education, I think IFMR did it. And it has always stayed ahead of the curve, understanding technology, marrying, okay, the current and contemporary areas. And you're going to be mentored, okay, by some of the finest thought leaders. And it is tailor-made, okay, for working professionals, both in terms of content, pedagogy, as well as the kind of timing, okay, and the duration that we have planned out, which I will talk about a little later. And of course, okay, we constantly embrace innovative pedagogy. The program design is a 12-week duration, 3 to 4 hours a week, convenient 1.5 hours, okay. It's going to be fully online, mostly on weekends. And sessions are going to be led by facilitators, along with global experts from the industry. And peer learning, okay, would be a critical part of the pedagogy here. There would be action learning projects, opportunities, okay, for live assignments and projects handled, okay, by the faculty. And you would have an opportunity to make a deep dive, okay, to understand how technology is driving innovation in business models, products, applications, and customer experience in the financial services. It would help you explore, okay, significant technological trends, okay, like AI, machine learning, deep learning, analytics, the blockchain, and so on and so forth. And the typical modules, okay, would range from innovations, developments, trends, and challenges in fintech, AI, machine learning, APIs, blockchain and cryptocurrency, payments, credit and lending, insurance, trading and capital markets, policy and regulation, financial inclusion, literacy, and future banking, neobanks and open banks. And the faculty lineup is, I would say, incredible. Like I mentioned earlier, it would be led by Mahesh, whom you have heard, apart from Pradeep. You also have Susan Chisi, who's award-winning CEO of FinTech Circle, FTSE board member, author, and speaker, and a FinTech champion. And Srinivas Kalyan Sundaram, who straddles both academics, research, and consulting, and he's part of the IFMR faculty. And you also have Padmanabhan Balasubramaniam, the former managing director of Goldman Sachs and fintech entrepreneur, advisory board member, okay, for the Center for Analytical Finance at ISB. This is just a representative list of faculty. There are going to be other thought leaders, okay, who are likely to be part of the program at different points of time. All right. And any questions, I'll pause here, and we look forward, okay, to you participating in the program. We will take the liberty of reaching out to you. Any questions? Anybody? Yeah, Sanjana has raised her hand. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hello. So I just wanted to know, does this certificate program have an eligibility criteria?
Come again. I'm sorry. Come again.
Does the program that you just mentioned, does it have like an eligibility criteria?
Mahesh, would you like to answer that?
Thank you, Sanjana. The program is actually geared towards two primary segments of people. People who have a domain knowledge, who are looking for what it actually takes to understand the tech part of the fintech, and the people who are coming from a tech background who need to understand more about the business models, the financial services, and different segmentation of the customers here. So as such, we don't want to confine that to have any particular academic record, but we wanted somebody who is an entrepreneur or who comes from a corporate background with a strong interest to do something in fintech would actually be the appropriate audience. Pradeep, do you want to add?
No, I'm good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sanjana.
Anybody else? Any questions? Okay. Thank you all. Thank you so much, okay, for being part of the session. Thank you, Mahesh. Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you for your time. And it was such a wonderful session, okay, where you have shared some of the very current thoughts on fintech. And as for the participants, look forward, okay, to you participating in the program, the certificate program. Thank you again. Have a restful evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.